Introduce our next round of speakers. I'm really excited for this conversation. As the Congressman mentioned, transit is in a dynamic state right now. It needs our support. And the Street Trust, as you know, has been thinking multimodally for quite some time now. And we need streets that are safe for all modes. And we also need to think about things interconnectedly. And so for us, centering transit at the beginning of our summit is something a little bit new for the Street Trust, but something that we think is critically important. We've invited the heads of 3 transit agencies from around the state to come and talk with us about the challenges that their systems are facing, some of the opportunities, some of the things that they're excited about as well, and take a few of your questions. We're going to hear from each one of them in turn. They're going to give us a brief state of affairs as they see it in their agency and community, and then I'll sit with them for a bit of roundtable discussion before taking a few questions from the audience. I'm going to introduce them all at once, though, so I didn't take up too much time switching off the mic. So the first speaker that we'll hear from this morning and that I'd like to introduce is TriMet GM Sam Desue Jr. And Sam, you can join us on stage if you'd like. Sam oversees all TriMet functions, from the transit service they provide to projects that improve and expand those services, from partnerships promoting transit-oriented development to regional efforts to address climate change. Sam has a wealth of transportation and transit experience. He's about to celebrate 30 years in the industry, same age as the Street Trust. We celebrated 30 years this year, and has been with TriMet since 2019, serving as GM for the past 2 years. Sam served at 3 different public transportation agencies in executive level positions at the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority. He served as the interim general manager and deputy chief executive officer, providing strategic leadership. Prior to Kansas City, Sam directed transportation services at both Pierce Transit and Community Transit in Washington. He also oversaw ground transportation at SeaTac International Airport, as well as operations at Seattle Monorail. Sam, thank you for being here this morning. Next up, I'd like to introduce Lane Transit District CEO, Jameson Auten. Jameson joined the district in 2022 from the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, where he served as Deputy CEO, Chief Operating Officer. With 20 years in the industry, Jameson has held a variety of key leadership positions with Kansas City Area Transportation Authority and with the Greater Richmond Transit System. He also serves on the board of directors for the American Public Transportation Association, in addition to serving a voluntary role with the National Academies of Sciences. Jameson, thank you for being here this morning. And I don't want to tell Kansas City we're sorry for stealing all their talent, but it looks like that's one thing we might be winning on here. Last but certainly not least with us here this morning is Andrea Breault, Transportation Director for Cascades East Transit, serving the Bend area. Andrea's 15-year career spans roles such as transportation planner, transportation demand manager, coordinator, facilities manager, assistant director of transportation and parking for Tufts University. In her multiple roles at Cascades East Transit, Andrea has advanced public transportation initiatives, including the design and implementation of transit projects that are multimodal, customer-oriented, and incorporate innovative technologies. Andrea serves on many different committees in Central Oregon that focus on climate initiatives, affordable housing, urban renewal, parking management, and transportation policy and planning. Her dedication toward customer service initiatives focused around accessibility, reliability, and convenience have resulted in the development of successful transportation options projects on both coasts of the U.S. Andrea, thank you for being here this morning. Come on up and join us. So first up, we will hear from Sam Desue Jr.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here surrounded by so many of you this morning who are passionate about active transportation. And you know its power in building healthy communities. To our friends joining us virtually, whether you're home or just off the max in Hillsboro or in a small town along the coast of Oregon, we thank you for being part of our conversation. I I want to thank Sarah and the Street Trust team involved in putting together this event. So let's give her a big round of applause. It's also an honor to hear from Congressman Blumenauer, one of our most committed advocates for transit in Washington, D.C., and a true friend of TriMet. We appreciate his leadership and his support, including his work on the bipartisan infrastructure law, which includes record funding for transit over the next 5 years. I'm also honored to be on stage with two of my colleagues, both Jameson and Andrea. Together, we're facing many opportunities as well as challenges as we work to keep people moving and our communities thriving. Access to safe and reliable transit is vital in building communities that work for all people, regardless of their race, religion, economic status, and disability. The MAX lines that connect Portland neighborhoods to its downtown are a point of pride throughout the Rose City. And our bus routes that reach the far corners of our metro area provides a valuable resource, helping connect towns across all 3 counties. This morning, I appreciate the opportunity to share a video about the agency that I'm blessed to lead. Can we play the video, please?
TriMet. We're how life moves. From the heart of Portland to communities across our Tri-County metro area, we take you to work in Beaverton, shopping in Nygaard, exploring in Hillsboro, school in Oregon City, the game at Providence Park, jobs in Troutdale, food carts in Milwaukee, the historic downtown in Gresham, and back home. TriMet's service is the thread that connects our community. We're a leader in climate action, one of the best tools for combating congestion, and we're a regional partner, actively working to advance equity in our community. TriMet is a strong investment for our shared future. Our administrative headquarters is in downtown Portland, and our operations run out of 5 facilities, 2 rail facilities, 1 in Beaverton and 1 in Gresham, and 3 bus facilities, including our newly renovated Powell Operating Facility in outer Southeast Portland. TriMet is building out a 4th bus facility on property purchased in 2018 on Northeast Columbia Boulevard. This is currently our hub for zero-emissions bus testing and training. Our service covers 533 square miles across Oregon's 3 most populous counties and its largest metro area, Portland. More than 1.65 million people live in our service district. That's about 90% of the total population of the Tri-County area and 39% of the state's population. We run 80 bus lines, 1 FX Frequent Express high-capacity bus line, 5 light rail lines, 1 commuter rail line, and paratransit service across the region. Nearly everything changed during the pandemic, but through it all, TriMet kept rolling. We remained a lifeline for those who are transit dependent, quickly adjusting to safely connect riders with essential services and frontline workers to essential jobs. Since 1969, TriMet has grown from a bus-only company to a multimodal regional leader that helps keep our community moving, our economy strong, and our air clean. While we face some daunting regional challenges, from housing insecurity to congestion, and from climate impacts to cost of living, we at TriMet are optimistic and hopeful for our future. Our strong partnerships and our efforts already underway will create meaningful solutions for our community. TriMet has long been a champion for climate action. While the environment benefits every time a person chooses a shared ride on transit over driving alone, our commitment to climate solutions goes further as we're actively reducing our own carbon footprint. TriMet is on the road to a clean energy future. While we've been testing electric buses since 2019, our first bulk order of 24 battery electric buses begins arriving in 2023. It's an important milestone as we transition to a 100% zero-emissions bus fleet by 2040. Until then, TriMet has greatly reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by switching to renewable diesel for our fixed route buses, lift vehicles, and West trains, and to renewable electricity for our MAX light rail system and all TriMet-owned facilities. With those actions, TriMet avoids 193 million pounds of greenhouse gas emissions every year. Our climate plan is just one way we are making transit better. As we emerge from the pandemic, we are bringing faster, more convenient service to our community. From our first TriMet FX high-capacity bus line that's moving more people faster and more efficiently along Division Street between downtown Portland and Gresham, to a better MAX Red Line currently under construction, which will extend the line into Hillsborough and bring track improvements that will make our entire light rail system more reliable. TriMet is improving the ride for our customers. Annual projects that rejuvenate our MAX system and key partnerships allowing us to speed up our buses are a few other ways we're working to make transit more accessible, convenient, and welcoming for all. To best achieve a truly welcoming system, TriMet has developed an equity lens, a tool and process to ensure our goals are advancing in equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion. With the help of riders, as well as regional and community stakeholders, we made great strides in the past few years, including launching a low-income fare program and decriminalizing the fare citation process. After reimagining our public safety efforts, we've enhanced our safety and security presence to help riders and connect people in need with social services. TriMet has also been an industry leader in minority contracting and workforce development for more than 2 decades. And we have established one of the most comprehensive civil rights Title VI programs in the nation. We adopted our first goals for engaging minority and women-run contractors in 1982. And in 2020, our award of the Division Transit Project to Raymore Construction, a minority-owned certified disadvantaged business enterprise, was the largest DBE contract in Oregon history. Led by Raymore Construction, that project broke agency and state history once again for a record DBE involvement with more than 75% of the work done by certified firms. We are proud partners in our community, working to assist with housing efforts. Since 2015, we have facilitated the development of more than 900 transit-adjacent housing units, with the majority designed as affordable housing. And TriMet was the first public agency to permit our partners at the Portland Housing Bureau use of a portion of our Menlo Park Park and Ride for a safe rest village, getting people off neighborhood streets and into safe environments where they can access basic amenities and connect with social services. This has been a snapshot of some of the initiatives we have in place to help our region address climate change, congestion, housing insecurity, and equitable practices, all in an effort to make our transit system better for our community and our region one of the best places to live. As TriMet steers into the future, we are on stable financial footing, and we are led by our first general manager of color, directing our most diverse executive team ever. And our board, appointed by the governor, is the most diverse in agency and in state history, with its first woman president. Together, with our more than 3,200 union and non-union employees, we are Team TriMet, and we invite you to ride with us as we help drive our region's future.
I want to emphasize a line from that video. It says, "We at TriMet are optimistic and hopeful for our future." Our most important asset at TriMet is our people. A strong workforce allows us to bring more customers together, and we are in that process of hiring and training new operators. And it's a common occurrence to hear from customers, to hear them tell our operators, "Thank you. Thank you for the ride." You'll see our MAX riders give a friendly wave to our operators or to our West engineers as they depart the train. I really know that they appreciate that, and so do I. I began my career as a bus operator in transportation, and you'll be surprised how much a simple thank you can keep your day moving. This year, TriMet began rolling forward our Forward Together program, informed by the feedback of our riders, our employees, and the community. And I'm sure many of you here today was part of that process. Among the improvements you'll enjoy, we're expanding our frequent service network and also our weekend service. 5 years ago, TriMet was the first agency to make our reduced fares available to those struggling financially. Since then, we've had more than 50,000 people sign up to ride at our sharply reduced rate. While safety challenges occurring in our community have extended onto our transit system, we are making strides to increase safety on board and throughout our system. We have more than doubled our unarmed security personnel since the start of 2022. And among our security teams is our relevant new safety response team, whose members connect those on and around our transit system with social services. While safety and security will always remain a priority, we are feeling unprecedented support from our lawmakers and our leaders more than ever. Both Jameson and I, we were at the Oregon State Capitol just recently testifying in front of the Joint Committee on Transportation back in January, and they heard our concerns about the societal issues of houselessness, behavioral health, drugs, addiction, and crime that's affecting our systems. But many state and local leaders are working to address those issues to making riding safer on our vehicles. TriMet and our service has shaped this community. You see it in our regional land use patterns. It's easy to spot with every new mixed-use development that goes up within blocks of a max track or a bus line. Our transit-oriented development team is working with community partners to use underused park and rides, land, and affordable housing, and more. We're looking for those opportunities to make investments in housing and community space, such as libraries, cultural centers, that will help shape a more sustainable future. And it's partnerships like these that really help fix some of the state's biggest problems. For Oregon to live up to its potential, it needs to lift up transit agencies throughout the state, recognizing the valuable service we play in the day-to-day lives of people in our communities. Transit is a connector, physically bringing people together, bringing equity to communities, and giving everyone the same access to jobs and opportunities and interest. This is what gives me optimism. No matter what the situation, public transit plays a critical role. And I just want to say it's an honor to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. I get to follow Sam Desue. That's a funny story. That's happened in my career several times. I followed him in the 2 different positions in Kansas City. His desk was still clean, still warm. And then I said to my wife, "Hold my beer," and we followed him to Oregon. So it's great to be here. I'm going to tell you one quick story about Sam Desue because it was mentioned that the state's winning with getting some folks from Kansas City. I'm going to tell you about Sam. What a jewel that you have here. Sam Desue is the only person I've ever seen on his last day walking out of the Breen Administrative Building in Kansas City. The employees lined the hallways and gave him an ovation to say goodbye. That's who you have here in Portland. That's who you have here. Me, on the other hand, I got a half-eaten day-old bagel in a high-C juice box, and that was that. Well, anyway, on behalf of the Lane Transit District, I want to thank you all for having us. I want to thank the Street Trust for having us and putting this fun event together. Very important topics indeed. Times have changed. Times have changed. We've learned a lot through the pandemic. I think we continue to learn a lot through the pandemic. People have reprioritized what's important in their lives. Companies who said we'll never have people work remotely instantly said you need to work remotely. And now companies want them to come back, and people say, no, we don't want to come back. You know, it's a part of who we've become, isn't it? It's a part of who we've become. Lane Transit District, smaller, much smaller agency than TriMet, about 105 miles down the road here, I-5. Come visit us sometime. Eugene Springfield is a wonderful community to spend time in, so I encourage you to do that. Lane Transit District, we have about 330 employees, about 100 vehicles, not including our ride source paratransit fleet. By the end of the year, 30 of those vehicles will be fully electric. So we have a good percentage of vehicles that are fully electric, and we're learning a lot about those vehicles. We have about 30 routes right now. We recently had to reduce service back in January. We had to reduce service because we didn't have enough operators. And we had to figure that out. We were over-promising to our community and not delivering. So we scaled back to deliver what we could do. And it was painful, and it continues to be painful because we want to do more, but we'll talk about how we're climbing out of that here in a little bit. In terms of the service, those are our service statistics. We serve most of Lane County, but I want to talk about people. You know, Sam had mentioned the number one resource in any organization is people. The people within our transit district are all there for the right reasons. They want to serve communities. They want to be tied to things that are bigger than what they do in their day-to-day. How do they connect and moving our communities forward? And our mission is to connect our communities. How do we do that? We do that through our transit services. We have a BRT line, which is called the Emerald Express, MX. That carries about 40% of our ridership. Takes you east to west from west part of Eugene into Springfield, and you can connect and go further into Springfield. It's the best way to get to any of the Ducks games if you come down, so just remember that. But we connect our people, and now's the time for us to look at how do our people connect with us? How do they interact with the services that we provide today? So we're very much hitting a reset button with Lane Transit District. And we have great support. We have great support from some folks who are in here. Rob with Better Eugene Springfield Transportation is here, and they work with us and hold us accountable as needed and come to the table with ideas. We have partners with Cascades Mobility. When the bike share, we're starting to work with them to figure out how do all these pieces connect. We have great partnerships with the cities we work with and with law enforcement that we work with as well. But at the end of the day, we have to learn how do our constituents, how do our communities interact with us? We had a few turbulent years. I've been on the job since November. We had some turbulent times in the past year and a half, 2 years. We lost a couple board members. We had a switch in our general manager. We had a pretty significant dust up, if you will, in the community over a project that was tied to us that resulted in one of our city councilors being recalled. That was all just last summer. Where we are now is we're in the process of rebuilding our connections, making sure we're serving the public. We're doing that in a couple different ways. The first way that we're going to do that is through we're assessing our communications and outreach strategy. You know, capital projects take a long time, and the project that resulted in the city councilor being moving ahead involved several different corridors with extending our BRT system onto one of the corridors, and the public, they just weren't having it. And what we learned was from the start of that project back in 17, 18, the players change, right? The players change and the pandemic happens, and then, you know, we're bombarded with information constantly. So we have to assess how are people receiving information now, and how are we gathering that information and turning that into decision making, and then communicating what comes out of that decision making to continue to build trust through transparency. So we're going through that process right now. We're going to be working with an external steering committee. Staff will serve as resources for that committee. We're going to put together a process that works best for our community. We're looking forward to doing that. And that's going to be the baseline for how we move forward. as an organization with our community. Then we're going to go through several studies to learn how we're doing. Is fixed route transportation as it exists today that main tool that works best for the communities we serve? Or is it a combination of other things? I've stopped using transit in my vocabulary. I lean more towards mobility, the whole ecosystem and range of things that connect people. And the personal automobile is a part of that, We want it to be a much smaller part of that, but it's a part of that. But how do we use all the different tools that we have to connect our people? Our MX route works great in certain areas. There's probably a better tool in other areas, so we're going to study that. We are going to study how we deliver services to our most vulnerable customers, those using our paratransit services. I'm very proud that LTD has a model that is in other places, but isn't very common. We use a brokerage model. So one call, and if you need a medical trip, if you need a vehicle that can handle stretchers, if it's an ADA trip, paratransit, if it's a non-ADA trip, if it's a trip using, we have a test pilot using VIA for microtransit, all of this comes through one shop. Our customers have one call to make. We work out which funding stream to charge on the back end. They don't need to worry about that. We want to make it easier for them. We're going to study how that system's working. How is that working for our most vulnerable members of the society that we serve? So I think as we go through these studies with our public and learn what the public really needs, what our communities need us to be, not what we want to be, but what our communities need us to be, that's going to be an important lever for us. So I'm excited about that. I am optimistic about LTD's future as well. We have I said the board got some changes around the board. We have a new board, fantastic board. We have a community that's engaged. I like to joke that I can't order a ham sandwich without going to 5 different councils or committees, and that's a true thing. But I joke about that. But the opposite is worse. Indifference is worse. So we have an engaged community that we're working with, and we look forward to that. All that said, fantastic. We have challenges. We have some of the same challenges that Portland has here, definitely on a smaller scale because we're a smaller community, but we have challenges. We have a very high level of unhoused that need help and need services. Our offices, our headquarters is in Springfield, if you're familiar with the area, it's a little bit away from our core of where all of our service activity is. We have a large transit center in downtown Eugene. So I spend 2 days a week in an office in downtown Eugene, and I don't get much administrative work done. I do quite a bit of walking meetings when it's not raining. It rains a lot. I'm not used to all the rain, but we're getting there. I do a lot of walking meetings, and I talk to customers, and I talk to our frontline employees. If you want to know anything about service operations, talk to frontline employees. If you're thinking about different fare structures, talk to frontline employees. They'll tell you what they see. If you want to talk about security issues, you want to talk about mental health issues, drug issues, you want to talk about reducing crimes for drug possessions, talk to our frontline employees. Just say, how's it going? And you'll see. Or sit at a station for an hour and you'll see. You see, the magic of it is transit mobility is not the thing that attracts bad behaviors. It's not that. Transit or mobility is not honey to an ant, right, for bad behaviors. It's a reflection of what goes on in our society. We're a microcosm of what's happening in society. So what's happening in society? All the bad things I just said, right? All the bad things I just said. So what are we doing at LTD? Well, Sam mentioned that we did go testify down in Salem. And what we're doing at LTD is we have added to our public safety. We've added to our security, of course. But we're out riding buses as a team, as staff. We're out riding buses in branded gear. And we're not cops, and we're not there to break up fights, and we're not there to do any of those things, but we're there to be there. We're there to show our frontline employees that we support them. We're there to talk to customers. It's important because that changes the characteristic of what's happening. You see, there was a study done where we looked at that. What does the public think of a uniformed police officer versus someone that appears to be an authority in branded gear? They prefer the person that appears to be authority in branded gear because there's no sidearm, right? There's no sidearm there, and there's none of the other things that the media portrays. But it helps to change the reflection and dynamic that's on the vehicle. So we get more confidence from our riders, and we get a higher level of support to our frontline employees, which is absolutely critical. And it gives us a chance to talk to a customer or two and tell them, hey, you need to go here to catch this or go there to catch that. So that's what we're doing down at LTD, Eugene Springfield. I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that it's tough times hiring. I think we're starting to come out of it a bit, but it was tough times hiring for us. We could not find anyone to drive buses. We had people retiring. So we had a big hole at the bottom of that bucket. Hence, we had to reduce service, which did not feel good. So what we've started to do now is we've taken a different tack. And Pat Walsh is here. Pat, raise your hand if you would. Pat Walsh is in the back there. He's our chief marketing officer. We decided to tell stories. We decided to tell stories. And these are not stories with actors. These are not stories that are made up. These are stories from our employees about the day in the life of what they do. We have a story that's in Spanish with English subtitles. That's not standard for 105 miles down the road. But we have a commercial in Spanish with English subtitles about one of our operators who didn't feel that he could get the job, but he got the job and he's raised a family on the job. We have generational stories about operators who have been there for years, and their parents have worked here, stories that are running right now. We have stories about our public safety team that we're pushing out through social media and on television. We're starting to get more operators. We're starting to get bigger classes because what we found out is down the road, and here as well, people want to connect to something bigger. So we've tapped into that in the psyche it's more than driving a bus. In fact, driving the bus is the easiest part of it, right? That's the easiest part of it. If you want to drive something, just drive, work for Amazon or UPS. Those packages don't speak. Those packages they don't have feelings. They don't have good days, bad days. They don't have needs. They're not trying to get to a job. So our frontline employees are the face of what we do. So we're telling that story, and we're starting to add to our driver ranks, and we're going to start to scale back service in the ways that make sense. I think I'm going to stop there. And take your questions, but we're very happy to be here. Happy that you all are engaged in the things that we do, engaged in how we get around, how your neighbors get around. This state is absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So preserving the beauty of that state, the freshness of the air, the pristine environment through what we do is important. And I'm so happy that you all are here. I said I was going to stop, but I lied. I think it's important for us to, going there, I think it's important for us to express our outcomes in ways that are important for the communities that we serve. Okay, so for us, it's unhoused, it's housing, it's mental health, it's jobs access, workforce readiness. And I believe that we all have an opportunity to do those things through transit, because transit is that thing that connects each of them. So I'm happy to be a part of this dialogue, happy to listen to your questions and take those back with me and participate with this group. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Andrea Breault, and I'm the Transportation Director for Cascades East Transit. Thank you to the Street Press for having me today. I am probably the smallest agency here up at this panel. We offer transit services in Central Oregon. Just a little bit about our agency. Our jurisdiction is Deschutes County, Jefferson, Crook, and we serve the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. So we have a very large geographical area, which is not the greatest thing when learning efficiency in transit. So I would say the biggest lesson that I've learned in taking over this role is all of our service models really have to speak to the community that we're meeting, right? So the city of Madras is quite different than the city of Bend. The Warm Tribes Reservations has different needs than the city of Sisters. And so you can imagine the complexity that we have to work in terms of figuring that all out. And so every day we're trying to work with each of these smaller towns to see what makes sense for them. I would say one of the largest things that we did over the course of the pandemic is overhaul our entire technology system. It's our dispatching system to allow for dynamic scheduling and timing, so that we're really trying to understand the needs and the frequency within those particular small towns. I will say overhauling the technology of 75 buses. I've done some wiring myself. We're a small bunch, we're very lean, but we're the jack of all trades is pretty much the theme at Cascades East Transit. So what does this actually mean, right? So a couple things that came out of kind of this new decision making and not a one size fit all. We took the city of Sisters. If you guys are familiar, it's kind of a Western cool tourism town that you travel through if you take US 20. Well, we found out some of those aging residents miss shopping. And they were like, we want to go to Bend to do all the big box shopping. We want to go to Walmart. We want to go to Target. And we didn't have a transit system set up like that. And so with our marketing team, and by team, I mean one person, myself, we implemented what's called the Sister Shopper Shuttle. It's a very personalized service because I know some of our senior citizens and sisters who have never taken transit in their life, who now no longer feel comfortable driving on some of these high-speed roads. And so we implemented a van that comes by Thursday with some storage so that they can buy some big groceries at Costco. They know the driver really well. It's a very personalized service. The driver will sit and wait for the individual to be done shopping and help carry things, groceries, clothing, you name it, right? And then we've got the city of Bend, who actually has fixed route services. I will say some of the issues that the panel here has mentioned, there's things that we're dealing with as well. We did have to reduce frequency because of lack of drivers. We're slowly getting back to normal. And we know infrequent service is just a killer in public transit and in terms of trying to gain the trust back to the community. Where here, the city of Portland, you can almost see a bus every 5-10 minutes. We would like to get a goal of either 15 or 30 minutes there in the city of Bend. Yeah, right? So small peanuts, but we're getting there. We're weekend service too is a big one. We really did try to deliver that right before the pandemic, and unfortunately with driver retirements, and we had to reduce the service. So we'd really like to get to Saturday and Sunday service, because for many of the communities in Central Oregon, that is the only way they can get to work, shopping, religious activities, you name it, right? A couple other unique things that we're working with is the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. We are a lifeline for them, all right? They do the majority of their grocery shopping, and I would say laundromat services in Madras, which is a good 20 miles south of the reservation. And so we're really interested in trying to gain more frequency because that is their lifeline to perform any type of function outside the reservation. The other thing that we've heard about a lot with Warm Springs, they have an unemployment rate of about 70%, right? And transportation is the #1 barrier to employment. So we are continually looking at how can we get them to employment centers. Well, we did hear that Government Camp and Mountain Meadows and Timberline, this is, roughly 75 miles north of just our furthest jurisdiction. And as someone in transit, I'm like, oh my Lord, how are we going to do this, right? So after years of trying to figure out how to get transit from Warm Springs up to Mount Hood, I partnered with Commute Options to pass through funds for employee van pool programs. And as of this winter, there are 2 vans that leave every day by lift operators that go to Ski Bowl, Government Camp, Timberline. They do their 8-hour shift and they come back down. And they're so grateful for that reliable transportation, a vehicle that's safe and sound. I will say the HR departments here at Mount Hood are just thrilled to have that kind of steady employment. So that's another example where you're seeing something completely unique be tailored more towards, the needs of the community. Another area that may be a little unique compared to TriMet and Lane is recreational services. I'm sure there's a bunch of folks in this room that like to come to Bend for all of the cool things that city has to offer. You've got pros and cons, right? You've got great tourism, but you've got a lot of congestion, right? For a city that's not really prepared for it the other 8-9 months of the year. And so CET takes it upon itself to basically find ways to mitigate that congestion when it comes to services like riding the river, the Deschutes River, going up and down certain buttes in the Newberry Monument Park. And I will say we're about 1 month away from ending our ski service. It's been quite the season for snow. And really what's important for us with that ski service, we provide Mount Bachelor 7 days a week, about 7 months of the year. That road is going through a national forest, right? And so we all understand the effects of climate change and congestion and some of these forest roads. And that road is getting pretty popular and unsafe. And so Mount Bachelor and CET partner quite often in how we can do to increase services, purchase new vehicles, to get these people up to the mountain safely and back down without having, jam-packed roads all the way through the Deschutes National Forest. And so those are kind of the examples of the sprinkling of what we do. I would say operationally, it is quite a puzzle because when you cannot apply one service model, you can imagine the complexity of shifts, timing, reservations, et cetera. And then I will say one last point on the operations piece is we have quite a large, what we call Medicaid and veterans population in Central Oregon. And so people may not know, but Cascades East Transit does spend a good portion of its time and energy in our brokerage program. We go into some of the most rural pockets of Central Oregon, which is really tough for us. That can be gravel roads, potholes, roads that haven't been maintained by their city governments in years. And we are trying to pick these people up so that they can go to medical services either in Redmond or Bend. And you can imagine, the dial-a-ride and the brokerage is probably not the most efficient, but probably the most in need in our area. And so it's important that we continue to put more resources into these areas so that these people can truly get to the services that they need. And then just touching on the Rural Veterans Program. This came about a few years ago. We applied for a small amount of funding, went for it, and this one blew up. I had no idea how many veterans we have in Central Oregon, all the way south into Crescent and Gilcrest. These are extremely small towns along the US 97 corridor that are really trying to get, even just to Lapine for a doctor's appointment. And we have become a lifeline for them for that service. We're eager to acquire more funding for this. And it's been quite successful in terms of getting those people the health care that they need. And then just speaking a little bit on what my colleagues have talked about in terms of safety and security. I know Bend is a hot place and everybody wants to live there. During the pandemic, it was such a magnet for remote working. But we do have a population that's unhoused. We have a lot of mental health and addiction issues. And CET is how they get around. Currently, our fixed route services and our regional services are fare free. And so this is how they've been able to get to cleanup centers or some of the shelters that have been building throughout Central Oregon. And so it's important that I continue to work with my team in terms of making sure that our operators feel safe, that our other riders feel safe. And so there's been a lot of investment on that end. We've done a lot of de-escalation training. We try to do that about 3 to 4 times a year in terms of understanding trauma, mental health. I will say all of our security and facilities people are trained in Narcan and a bunch of other, life-saving opportunities when we do see members of the public having issues. And I will say we've had a number of drivers actually step in and save an individual's life. We do try to recognize them at our board level and realize without them, some of these issues have gotten a lot worse. But for the most part, we're looking forward into the future, getting out of the pandemic, rehiring. We're purchasing non-CDL vans so that people can come in without a commercial driver's license. We're getting a bit smaller so that we're easy to navigate some of those smaller streets. So overall, CET is going to have a positive outlook looking in the future. And then just a small plug for my 1 p.m. Presentation. We'll be talking about mobility hubs. And so I'll be getting a little bit into our community partners throughout Bend and making sure those first last mile connections all come together and procuring property to build these things. So thank you.
Can we get another round of applause for all three? Well, thank you very much, especially for those of you who had a very long commute. We appreciate you taking the time. It's such an important conversation for us with our communities. I wanted to get started with the pandemic. You all referenced it. And one of the things we're finding is it's not a recovery from the past to something that we can get back. There's going to be a new normal. So could each of you just take a couple of minutes and talk about, since the pandemic's onset, how are you thinking about your systems differently? And what's the plan to recover the ridership, maybe in different ways? Or if it's the same ways, tell us that too. But it seems to me there's a lot in flux post-pandemic, Jameson, especially as you referenced with regard to commute patterns, who needs to go where, when, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe just down the line this time and talk a little bit about your pandemic recovery.
I'll go first. Sure. Okay, sure. So, I don't talk about pandemic a whole lot in terms of ridership. We're chasing ridership numbers that were decreasing even before the pandemic. The pandemic accelerated it. So the challenge for us is how do we become what our communities need us to be, and what are the pieces that give people options so that choosing to leave a car at home is a viable option. And that goes beyond. There are so many different factors to that. The length of the trip, the time it takes to do that trip in comparison. But then there are other factors. How does it connect to something bigger? How does it connect to environmental issues? How does it connect to, if we're doing TOD right, do we help to create more, a catalog of more housing, period, whether it's workforce housing or affordable housing? So I think taking a look at all of those pieces of what's important to the community, we can talk ridership, and ridership's an important indicator, don't get me wrong, but it's not the only one. It's not the only one. I think that we have to express ourselves in terms of what the real outcomes are that are impacting our communities, what are the priorities there, and drive towards those. I've talked to lots of elected officials in several different states. Kansas City was interesting because you had 2 states and 4 senators and a bunch of Congress people, and different viewpoints along the way. The one commonality was when we talked ridership numbers, it really didn't mean much except it was a big number. But when you started talking about access to jobs, or how many people can get to jobs in this amount of time, or are we working with daycare centers, and are we working with educational centers? the lights started to come on and it started to connect. So I think it's important for us to chase after what are the real outcomes and go from there, understand how our public is using us and how we need to change to make sure that we have a real mobility option.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Sam, would you like to speak next?
Absolutely. Everything changed during the pandemic for TriMet. And the one thing that was valuable to us is that it was vital that transit continue to roll, to make sure that we get our emergency workers and our transit-dependent personnel to opportunities, to appointments, to needed services. And also, we had to be very nimble. We had to be able to pivot during that time frame. If you recall all of the social distancing that took place, 6 foot, 3 foot, mask, unmasked. So we had to really take care of our frontline personnel. It was absolutely paramount. We put barriers up. We had masks on board. We had hand sanitizer on board our vehicles. Going to your question about bringing ridership back, during the pandemic, we took an opportunity to bring an outside consultant in, Jared Walker and Associates, and work with our planning team to really do a overall comprehensive service analysis. And the plan that we call it Forward Together. And it looked at people's travel patterns, which during the pandemic, when the governor deemed the emergency, sent everyone home, patterns changed. So we evaluated our patterns, we restructured our bus services. The biggest thing that came out is that we eliminated our peaks, our morning peak. People start utilizing services around 11 o'clock and it would go all the way up until 8, 9 o'clock. And then weekend service really picked up quite a bit. So as we continue to work with returning more people to work and looking at those patterns, it's going to be something that we're going to look at. But I think the key piece here for all of us on the stage is really to set people up, set our citizens up in all three, in this whole region, the state of Oregon, set them up for success, making sure that we provide transportation services or mobility services to those opportunities, to jobs, housing, medical, and other opportunities.
Thank you, Sam. Andrea?
Yeah, and so, very similar, quick learning experience of what this meant for us. I will say CET did not stop service. We continued through, the initial lockdown because it was important that our community understand we are a safety net that people probably don't recognize until, there is no service. So, making sure that we could continue, that next day, what was it, March 18th, we continued as always, just different provisions. I will say where we saw the largest difference is what we call our rural dial-a-ride. Folks that live in Prineville or Madras and Sisters and Redmond needing to go to work. Some of these smaller communities, we are the only taxi form basically for them to get around. And that has been slow to recover. We do believe that some of our rural communities and perhaps aging population decide to retire early. And so shifting gears and seeing where we can deploy those resources, the fleet, the drivers. And then I will say, Sam mentioned, we don't technically have peak service quite yet, CET. And that has been written into, our adopted plans, but we're re-looking at that. That may no longer make sense in the post-pandemic world, and understanding where we need to deploy additional, vehicles or drivers, and it may not necessarily be the 8 a.m. commute, but maybe in the city of Bend, it's the 6 p.m. Concert goer, or wherever there may be a larger demand to make those resources happen. And then I would say, in terms of, the sanitation efforts and keeping the buses clean, something that just internally happened at our agency is there was a sense of pride in keeping the fleet clean. And we wanted to keep up this new normal, both interior and exterior. We had drivers wiping down things, and now you see a passenger get on our bus and they just automatically, put some hand sanitizer in. We've got folks that may still wear a mask. So oddly enough, that was a little bit of a positivity that came out of us. And like I said, I'm glad when my operators enjoy, their little space there and take pride in it.
That's really nice. I like that added side benefit of all of the precaution, right? Things are a little bit more sanitary. Let's stay on this for a minute because the role of operators keeps coming up again and again. And I want to hear about the health of your workforce. I know that nationwide, there's an operator shortage. We're having a challenge staffing up at agencies across the US. And I'm sure, as you've all mentioned, that staffing has affected your operations and how you can provide service to your community, but also the issues of public safety, which we will get into. As you said, Jameson, talk to an operator, talk to someone inside your agency and find out their experience of that. Can we go down a little bit deeper into how your workforce is doing just generally and how you're approaching that from your leadership position? And you can take this in any order you want.
I'll start off. The pandemic was something that, again, changed everything for us. And if you remember, we moved from the pandemic to Delta to Omicron. And then we had something that was called the Great Resignation that affected all employers here in the state. At one time, we were short upwards to 300 transit operators to provide service here in the Portland metro region. We put together a steering committee within the organization to really start discussing what will be our strategies to move forward to bring our workforce together. Also, we focused on the employee experience with the organization as well, going through the pandemic. So we focused on how to recruit and how to retain employees. We had conversations around, we did an engagement with our employees to find out what will it take to continue to bring you, to value you here at our organization. And I think that was very critical for us. And one of the things that they wanted is resources. They wanted our support. They wanted to be recognized and celebrated. So we took those things into consideration. We started out on the celebration side. We started celebrating victories and achievements throughout the pandemic. We also looked at bringing a hiring bonus into TriMet in order to increase that and let people know over a 3-year period of time, we want you to stay with TriMet and also move us forward. Another piece was the safety of our operators out operating the system. You know that transit assaults were high during that time frame there. So we decided to look at ways on how we were going to protect our operators. One was putting up the safety panels in the vehicles. We had operators that were dashed with coffee and other items as well. And our goal was to really protect them and keep them safe. So providing them with the safety panels, providing them with masks, providing them with education. We talked about de-escalation, on how to de-escalate situations out there. We did anti-racism training with all of our operators during that time. You recall, after George Floyd, all of the issues that we dealt with here in the Portland metro region, we wanted to make sure that we provided every aspect of training to our personnel that was possible. So then the very last thing I would say that was very critical here, we looked at our full compensation framework, the number of days off that we were giving our employees. We looked at our schedules. We took a look at everything and put it on the table to be reviewed and also to be better. The engagement was the key piece there. engagement and celebrating our employees was a key piece of making them feel valuable.
Yeah, I think we have a similar story. Before I answer about the operators, let me just say this. All of our employees at LTD did an amazing job during the pandemic. So I'm told. I wasn't there. But, we had administrative folks who had to learn how to juggle their work-life balance from kitchen tables, or if they had home offices, navigate if they had kids, homeschooling and all of those pieces. So I want to acknowledge that as well. I also want to acknowledge the folks who turned the wrenches and cleaned the vehicles, because they were operating from a space where, information was changing and they're going home to their families, and you can't fix a vehicle remotely. I guess you could. Elon Musk probably has something, but you can't do that in Eugene Springfield LTD. All right, so they were migrating through some things as well. In terms of our bus operators, they did an amazing job. And when I got in there, they were the ones who were face to face, masks, having to enforce masks, barriers, all of the things, and worrying about what are they taking home to their families as well. And they were doing all of that from a labor contract that had expired. So one of the first things that we did was get in there and get to an agreement on a labor contract, and we rewarded them for what they did and how they carried our communities through that pandemic, because service kept running and they showed up each and every day. That said, we've been dealing with some high absenteeism rates, and we think that's tied to fatigue of doing that work each and every day. We've talked to, when I got in there for the past 6 months, my first goal wasn't to understand all the finances. I know the audits, we get great audits. I need to understand the people. So spending a lot of time back in the break room, in the operators lounge, riding routes, talking to operators, hearing their experience, hearing what they had gone through, they were just flat out tired. Some of them were retiring due to that, weren't quite ready to retire, but were retiring because they were just tapping out. So that's why it was important for us to understand, how can we, one, get to an agreement so that we could start to use our operators as ambassadors and truly reward them, and send the message that you are rewarded for good, hard, dedicated work at LTD. But also use them as brand ambassadors. Who else knows the job better than the ones who are doing it? And if they give a referral to someone, they'll give them the real story, right? And they'll give a referral to someone that their name is attached to. So we went down that path as well. But I think, in terms of the operators, making sure that they have enough time for a mental woosah moment to kind of take it down. We did de-escalation training. We've done some other things. We're going back into the employee celebrations. We had stopped those, like most organizations did, but we're moving back into that direction. We had to get the labor agreement done first. We had to stop fighting, right? We had to stop fighting over a job well done, and we did that. So we'll be moving forward that way. But I think it was a lot of fatigue.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Andrea, do you want to add?
Sure. I've kind of got an odd thing to mention regarding this. All the same, issues and concerns they've mentioned. With my operators in Central Oregon, when it came to the pandemic, a lot of them had different political views on the pandemic. And as the director, I had to recognize the spectrum that I was hearing from the operators, and recognizing that a solution, such as maybe the panels or additional masks, et cetera, may not work for some operators. And so navigating that space, I probably aged a few years, but I gained the trust of all of the operators, not forcing them to do things and allowing others to do everything they wanted to do to feel safe. So I don't know if you guys dealt with that, but at CET, that was, a lot of just sitting down, listening to them, and recognizing that each of them had a different opinion on what was taking place, and navigating the way they wanted to navigate through that. They're still here, so and they they come to me and talk to me about anything, that may be bothering them. So I'm glad that that trust continues. And then one thing that I was going to mention out of the pandemic is, recognizing we live in a world where you can now have a job, work remotely, and have flexible hours. Unfortunately, not very applicable to public transit, but I did speak to one of our youngest recruits. He's 26 years old. He skateboards into work. And I was like, how do we get more people like you to work for us? And he's like, well, flexible hours. I was like, well, you kind of have to drive the bus or you don't. I don't, and so we were kidding around, and what he wanted was, he hated doing the same route every day. He's like, no, I want to go out here, and I want to drive this maybe, and I want to change it up. And so re-looking at some of our, shift bids and our scheduling, so that for the folks that may want to do something different and kind of spice up the daily routine, we may be able to attract some younger people who don't want, the same thing every day, where some of my older drivers really like that predictability. So.
Yeah, it's a dynamic world out there for sure. We got a lot of generational shifts as well, both inside and outside the agencies, which I think, to flip this coin, let's talk about the business community, because I know we talked briefly before this, and I thought you had some good insight into how you're talking differently with the business community about the role of transit. From us here at the Street Trust, we're trying to get as many people invested in transit success, even if people aren't personally riding, for instance, so they can see we're all interconnected. How are you talking maybe differently with the business community in the wake of the pandemic and as you execute your future plans? And again, you can take this in any order you'd like.
So I'll say two things on the business side. First, I think the city of Bend is recognizing its growing pains. The city is skyrocketing in terms of population and development. And they're recognizing that, with some of the new development code changes, they may not be able to, build all the parking that they used to be able to, or getting frustrated with some of the congestion that's growing in that city. So all of a sudden they're having to open their eyes a bit and think differently, because in rural communities, you don't have that constraint of space, but the city is recognizing that. So we are bringing them to the table. I would say the other thing that we're working on is recognizing that Bend, Oregon is becoming an extremely expensive place to live. And so all of the, cool restaurants and recreational venues, they're struggling to find employees. So they turn to CET and go, how can we get these people to Bend cheaply, reliably? So we are working with some of the smaller communities in doing some mapping to see where these folks are now living and then commuting in to Bend. So I would say the affordability is just naturally forcing a different conversation that wasn't there before.
So being new to the community, I have a whole different kind of conversation than folks who have been operating there for a while. Part of, and they've all been really good conversations. I think part of it is there's an educational component. I see buses running and they're empty. Well, you kind of walk them through the on and off of how bus transportation works, and then the light starts to go on. And one of the first comments I got from one of the people who are on the other side of that recall was, the person said, "I'm not an enemy of public transportation. I just want to know what you're solving for." So I think setting up the equation for them, what are we solving for? What is the potential return on what the investment is important, and being transparent in the results. I've heard a lot about that in my conversations around Eugene Springfield, and I think that's critical, because in other places there's a different funding model. So if there's a sales tax that flows through a city, you have to go talk to city council. Here's what we did. I can't go to every landscape business in Eugene Springfield and tell them what we did. So we've got to be overly transparent with the means that we have, whether it's our website or our annual reports, or our annual state of public transportation, or working with partner groups. And then I think you can get to a point where you understand what how public transportation interacts with their businesses, and you can start to put it in terms of that we are pro-business. We deliver your workers to your front door. And if we're not delivering workers to your front door, we're certainly delivering people that you depend on, whether you're on that vehicle or not. So I think getting an understanding of what the desired outcomes are for that group is important, because they're keeping the lights on in what we do. So over transparency for us is critical.
One of my goals of being hired into this job was community and partnership. And I think it's absolutely critical for TriMet to tell our story to all 3 counties and be part of the solution, being at the table, asking our business leaders, how can we help and how can we be part of it? And that's something that you're going to see more of me over this next 12 months out with, starting here with Street Trust, really talking about how can we be better, how can we put more mobility out to set people up for success, and also working with the business leaders on making sure that we are part of your solutions out there to be able to do that. Part of it is really being at the table, being present, and things that I've done now is meeting with different volunteering groups. I've been out now to all of the county governments, city governments, working with them, talking with them about how can we be a better partner in the situation.
Thanks for that. And I'm told that there aren't any submitted questions yet. So Anuksha, raise your hand, maybe even come up front. If you want an index card so you can submit a question to the panel, just let Anuksha know, and we'll get it up here. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about public safety. It's how I found, it's where in part I got the idea for this, was seeing the presentation that you did to the Joint Committee on Transportation. It was so powerful, I think, to hear about the things that were shared across the different agencies, regardless of size or geography in many ways, or even the composition of the community. And it speaks to that point of what's happening in the larger community being reflected on transit, but not a product of transit. So I would love for you to just take a minute and talk about maybe some of the more challenging aspects of what's being additionally called on you that you haven't historically had to do as transit agency leaders, right? There's a whole additional spectrum of work and expertise that you and your staffs are having to demonstrate, but also then how do you build that into your institution? Because clearly that interface is proving essential. So do you want to talk about just the complexity almost in systems change of this rethinking of public safety and how you're dealing with the current crises on your system that are part of our crises in larger society?
I'll go first. I want to set the mood for a moment. I want to take us back to May of 2020. And I want you to think about it. The situation with George Floyd had just happened. Portland went immediately into protests for 150 plus nights. We had looting, we had various things that happened in the downtown. Our trains needed to be assisted by the police department in order for them just to get into downtown with everything that was going on. We needed to take a look at it. We were told that our transit police had problems. And as a new leader coming in, I'm faced with all of these things and working with my team to really take a look at it. So our first step is that we had to reimagine public safety. We needed to take a look at how can we explore community-informed initiatives in order to help riders really feel more safe and also welcoming on our system. So the very first piece we did is really focused on training. We stopped everybody, all of our operators, all of our personnel, frontline personnel. We made sure that they were trained in mental health, they were trained in anti-racism, and really we looked at increasing our presence on the system with unarmed personnel. And that was the key there. We wanted to really remove that force that was out there. And then we looked at crisis intervention teams, putting teams out there that can respond to people who are in crisis just as well as having the behavioral issues out in the system. And critical to connecting them to those social opportunities that was there. We looked at our infrastructure. We increased our lighting at several of our stations there so that anyone that was using the system at night, that the lights would be on and very bright for them. We looked at tracking our customer incidents because we wanted to focus on those areas where the repeat issues were taking place. We put all of that into place. We reimagined how we were doing business there, and we decided to really move from the Portland Police Department to the Multnomah County Sheriff Department. We transitioned as well for our transit police. Our numbers of transit police officers have decreased. We have very few police officers, but we have multiple unarmed security that's out there, and also all of our intervention teams that are there to really assist people, to help them to those opportunities that's there. I appreciate the work of our security teams that have taken place out there, and also really reaching out to our riders, reaching out to you. If you see something, say something, call us, let us know what's going on. And we're continuing to work with our colleagues here on the panel, just as well as all of our elected officials about the societal issues that we're faced with. But we have definitely seen a decrease in calls with the police on our system this year here. And we are continually to increase our unarmed and crisis intervention teams. We are north now of security personnel of 100 security officers out on our system, and we're looking at providing more. And then we're north of about 80 different personnel that's working on our crisis intervention team. So more work there, and it gives me optimism that we're moving forward in the right direction.
So continual training with our folks. You know, it's changed so much that, you know, now you're a bus operator or a road supervisor / counselor / social worker / quasi law enforcement / sometimes you got to put on your dad voice with teenagers as well, right? So I think it's been important for us to look at partnerships. We can't do all of those things exceedingly well. We can do them good enough to make the connection points, right? So we work closely with our downtown has ambassadors, our police, they have ambassadors. We connect with them, we share information with them. We have folks who are riding vehicles in branded gear and supporting our people. The training has changed. You know, we train how to operate a vehicle, but we also train how to de-escalate. We do some verbal judo type trainings. We're constantly gauging and offering counsel on different interactions that we have each day. But you know, at the end of the day, and I've said it before, we're about people, and the vehicle doesn't matter. It's the people that we're transporting and the people doing the transporting. So we've got to make sure we set them up so that everyone gets where they need to go safely. Everyone gets to go home at night safely. So you know, we've had to look at things differently. I think, you know, we're talking more with social workers than ever, trying to identify folks that need services. There's crossover in their clients and those that we see having different challenges day in and day out. So we've really got more ingrained into the community that way. But we also work with law enforcement because sometimes that's the service that's needed. And, you know, sadly so, it just is. But we train our folks day in and day out. And I think the last piece is, it's critical for decision makers to have that experience when we make decisions. So we're inviting our executive teams to be out and about on the service. We're inviting community leaders to be out and about on the service. And if you all want to come down to Eugene, Springfield, we'll take you out and about on the service, because we need to take that into the decision-making room, take those experiences, and we're interacting with, we had paused our labor management committee during the pandemic because we're cutting out a bunch of meetings. We've re-engaged that to make sure that we have those frontline perspectives coming into the decision-making process. So we'll continue down that path.
Similar to them, CET has invested a lot of resources in, security and safety, personnel, cameras, everything, you name it. But that's kind of low-hanging fruit to the larger picture that we've been, hitting on the theme. I will say CET is part of a council of governments. We are part of Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, and our executive director, Tammy Bainey, is really leading the front on houselessness in Central Oregon and looking at larger strategic initiatives. CET can only do so much, but we do have a voice within our agency that's looking at the regional level, and our divisions under COIC has also been tasked with providing additional housing and services, et cetera. So I would say on a large scale, those conversations are taking place, which is really helpful on our end. But to end it on a positive note, one of these very small success stories CET has done with the homeless community, particularly in Bend, everybody that operates a transit agency knows that large bags of cans can dominate conversations in our world of operations. And we went full throttle into this conversation. As you can imagine, cans leak, they smell, they can block means of egress, they may block the wheelchair lift, a whole plethora of issues that can cause issues for our operators and the riding public. And so I was determined. I said, we've got to figure this out. I want this issue to be, eliminated, whatever the case may be, if there's a partnership we could create. So I did find an individual that leads, can collecting in Bend, and we sat down and we hashed it out. And he has been a great partner in, working with his community about keeping with the bus rules, as long as you can carry that bag of cans and not bother anybody else, we will drop you off where you need to go. And so that is an example of us going directly to the community that may use our system, that may have questions or issues, and we're working side by side. We talk once a week on what we can do to improve communication and marketing, so that people do behave on our buses, recognizing that if you do not, we may have to remove you from that service, and you don't want that to happen. And so those are very real conversations that CET has been having with certain communities.
And thank you all for your hard work on that too. I know it's very challenging for all of our leaders right now. So thanks for your careful attention to that situation. So I'm going to switch over to some audience questions here, and thanks to folks who submitted them. One question comes, how can you partner more with employers to cover worker fares? And I think that speaks a little bit to maybe even how you talk about the role of the fare box in your work, some of the complexity around that, and maybe calls for zero fare transit and where and when, because who pays for the fares and how is a pretty big question for all of us right now. So I don't know if you want to lead off with that, Sam, and then we can have the other folks talk too.
Yeah, I'll start off. Fares help provide service. It helps pay for operations. It pays for buses. Want to let you know, in today's world, just a 40-foot bus costs a little north of $500,000. And then if you go battery electric, you're looking at anywhere from $900,000 to $1.5 million per bus. And it's something that TriMet has pledged that we are going to go to zero emissions by 2040. So that means we're going to replace all 800 buses that we operate from that standpoint. So we're trying to figure out where does the money come from to be able to pay for that. Fares look at shelters and maintenance and safety and security as we continue to increase our safety and security to keep you safe. And again, it's all about the customer. We focus back to the rider. It's about making sure that you're safe and feel welcome when you ride our system, but someone must pay that cost. There's a cost to operate with that, along with other revenue streams that we provide or receive. I would also say too is that fairless to me is never free. And I know some of you probably think that Jameson and I came from Kansas City, and Kansas City has a fairless system. There's some things that we can really talk about that and kind of give you our opinion about that. As you increase service, and one thing that as a transit leader always want to do is make sure that the service expansion is something that we're doing for the community. Because again, our goal is to make sure that you all are successful and putting you in positions to succeed by making sure we get you the opportunities to be able to go to jobs and appointments and everything else. So I know that there are some pilot programs that are out there in smaller cities and college towns that are struggling right now. And I can tell you directly, because I've been in contact with Kansas City, they are struggling right now to continue a fairless system right now because the revenue is no longer there. And there's a debate now between the city government and the organization right now about how much fare that the government is going to provide that organization. I just want to end on this, is that again, as we continue to look at our Forward Together, we are focusing on extending service. We're focusing on making sure that you are transported opportunities, and we need the fare to be there. Most organizations, and I don't know about Lane and Jameson, we'll talk a little bit about it, but I do want to tell you that TriMet is facing a deficit that's coming in 2030 currently. And it's something that's been on my mind since I've been in this role here, on how to deal with that, how to push it out so that we can continue to provide service, the service levels that we're providing you now, how we continue to do that. And then the last piece of that is that our Max Blue Line is at its life expectancy. So we've got to replace trikes, overhead, catenary wires, everything that's on there, and there's no funding. There was no funding mechanism that was left for us to be able to do that. So working with our businesses, working with our key leaders around our local community, our state community, working with Congressman Blumenauer and DeFazio to really bring in funding to make sure that TriMet is here for you for the next 50 years.
Thank you, Sam. And just a reminder that one quick part of that is employers covering worker fares too. So I don't know if you wanted to talk to that specifically, or maybe punt to your partners on the panel.
I'll punt it and then I'll come back
Okay.
again.
So yeah, so we work with employers on past programs, and we think it's important for people to have an option on using the system, and whether it's the subsidies on the employer. I think we give them a discounted rate to begin to build that right in on their passes. So we do that now. I think it's important to understand. You asked about farebox, and farebox recovery on the system. Anywhere from 5 to 12%, right? So people look at it and go, we had an old boss that said we can find that change in the cushions of a couch. Was his quote. But it's more than that. It's more than that. I've lived a zero fare life. We called it zero fare versus fare free because we wanted to make sure that there was still a value to it, right? It's nothing's free. We just heard the congressman talk about parking at Fred Meyer. That's not free either, right? So it's not free. Someone has to pay for it. So what was my experience with it was we found a gap to plug most of it. But then we dug a bigger hole because we had to spend money on additional security. I mean, all you have to do is look at the budgets and you'll see that. But the other piece was what level of service currently exists with a fare? And is it more important to take a fare box out of a vehicle, or is it more important to have more frequency? Is it more important to actually expand the system where people want to use it and pay that $1.50 or whatever it was? For Eugene Springfield, we're not there yet. That we've had I've had that question quietly in a couple different ways, but we're assessing how people use our service. What is the service that needs to exist, and then we'll price it, right? We have to have something viable before we talk about a pricing policy here. But things are not, prices aren't going down. And Sam talked about the price of fully electric vehicles, replacing a fleet of 800. Guess what? That number is not going to be 800. It's going to be north of 800 because it's not a one-to-one exchange. And that doesn't take into consideration the infrastructure change and the workforce development and the training and all of those pieces. It just doesn't account for that. So prices are going up on one side, on the expense side. And I know you say, oh, those are all capital costs. I get that. But driving those vehicles and fixing them, those are very much operational costs. And they could double, right? Because you don't buy 1.4 buses, you buy two. And you have to drive those and you have to fix those. So I think that the clearer picture of where do we want to go, what do we want our fleets to actually look like, what do our communities need our fleets to look like, put a price tag on that, look at where service is going. Is the service effective? Is it meeting needs? Yeah, okay, now let's put a price tag on that. Then you have the fair conversation, because otherwise it's premature. And I'll add one more thing. Zero fare has been done in several ways. Down in Memphis, what they're doing is a version of, if the city has a program that you qualify for, whether it's income-based or housing, subsidized housing or those things, you automatically qualify for the zero fare. They'll give you the pass, right? That's serving the folks who truly need it for an economic reason. And they've gone through another service and they're getting wraparound services, so it's more of a comprehensive approach. If that's what the outcome, what we're trying to solve for in that scenario, to me that's a worthwhile approach. Something worth looking at. So the story is still outstanding on what zero fare actually does. As Sam said, we've both had some experiences with it. There have been some positive outcomes, without a doubt. That money stays in people's pockets. That's been studied several different ways, at least 3 ways in Kansas City alone. But in terms of Lane County, it's a premature conversation for us. We have to look at what our baselines are first.
Did you want to weigh in, Andrea? Or?
Sure, just 2 seconds. I do mention that the city of Bend does have an employer program. If you give up your parking spot, you can participate in CET for free, bike share, and a variety of other mobility options. So I do know that exists. I will just say quickly, CET is not a transit district. We are solely a grant-based organization. And so I will say fares are really important on our recreational services that I've mentioned earlier on. Without fares, those services would not exist. And I know they're important from an environmental congestion and climate change perspective that we retain those. That is how those services are performed. And so it is crucial in Central Oregon that fares are collected, particularly for recreational. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm being told that I've run over time significantly, as I am prone to do. So I thank you all for humoring me on that. No one pulled me off the stage. I want to say a special thanks to Vanessa and Matt as well, who were our ASL interpreters today. And we're very, very thankful for you. And can I get a big round of applause for our transit agency heads? Thank you for keeping us moving. Okay, and because I ran over, it means your coffee break is slightly shorter than it should be. Let's come back here at 10 past and we'll try to get a hard start at 15:15 since we ran over for that next panel. And yeah, I'll try to keep us on time tomorrow morning. Thanks again, everybody, for being here this morning.
my